Hello, and welcome to Nostalgic Medicine, where we take a look at fascinating stories about the history of medicine and healthcare. Today's video will be about the Zika virus pandemic that happened around the mid 2010s. So, this is the COVID-19 virus. When it first emerged, we quickly found out that the majority of people only get quite mild symptoms, which led to many people saying that it's just a cold. Well, the cold doesn't kill anyone, whereas COVID 19 has killed over 20 million people over the last 3 years, making this one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. So, a bit worse than a cold, if you ask me. But what if a virus does emerge which seems like a cold that doesn't kill anyone, such as what monkeypox seems to be turning out to be? Does that mean that we shouldn't care about it and just let it rip through the population? Well, I would say no. And let me just use the recent Zika virus pandemic, which some of you might remember, as a perfect example as to why a cold can end up being way worse than just a cold. So, the Zika virus, despite coming into headlines around 2015, was actually discovered back in 1947 in the Zika forest in Uganda, which is where it gets its name. The virus, just like malaria, is transmitted between humans by mosquito bites. But luckily, unlike malaria, it seemed to be a very rare disease with only about a dozen confirmed cases a year between 1947 and the end of the 20th century. And most importantly for public health officials, it mainly only caused mild symptoms like a fever, headache, and a rash, and it didn't kill a single person for over 50 years. So these public health officials had all the reason to think that it was no worse than just a cold. Now, even though most people know about the Zika virus from its outbreak in Brazil in 2015, there was actually two epidemics of Zika around a few Pacific islands in 2007 and 2013. And this is where scientists were first able to really understand how Zika could affect humans, as there were over 30,000 cases during this period. Now, thankfully, no one died, so again, this makes it quite consistent with it being just like a cold. But there was about a 1 in 2,000 chance of getting a serious disease called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a condition where your own body's immune system literally goes crazy and attacks its own nervous system in response to what is usually just a mild infection. This can end up causing complete paralysis and even death, as your body can't move the muscles needed for breathing. Well, you might be thinking that a 1 in 2,000 chance is quite low, but this actually puts it up there with some of the most likely pathogens to cause Guillain-Barré syndrome, so it's starting to look a little bit more than just a cold. So now you must be thinking, why did these epidemics go unnoticed to the general public, but the ones in Brazil and the rest of the Americas make worldwide headlines? Well, despite the obvious point that the Pacific Islands are quite disconnected socially from the rest of the world, it's because the epidemic in Brazil was much larger than these last two, as the large amount of travel that came to Brazil because of the 2014 FIFA World Cup caused a massive 1.5 million cases in Brazil compared to the 30,000 cases I mentioned earlier. Now, this is where the full effects of what Zika virus could do were finally realized, but it was too late to stop it by then. So, like I said, 1.5 million people were infected with Zika in total in Brazil alone, and this initially caused some mild concern after a few dozen people developed Guillain-Barré syndrome, but most of these people just got better with hospital treatment, and less than 10 were reported to die. But this turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg because about 3 months later in 2015, health officials in Brazil noticed a sudden rise in the number of babies being born with birth defects, most commonly microcephaly, which is also known as a small skull, which is pretty much guaranteed to cause developmental problems when these babies get older. And yes, all of these babies had mothers who were infected with Zika virus during their pregnancies. So this set Brazil and the rest of the world into panic mode. Many countries banned flights to Brazil during late 2015 and early 2016, and Brazilian health officials warned women to not get pregnant at all because it seemed like even though Zika virus was harmless to living humans, it was extremely dangerous to developing fetuses, with research studies estimating that there was up to a 10% chance of giving birth to a baby with microcephaly if you were a pregnant woman that had Zika virus. A number that I don't think that even the bravest of people would want to take their chance with. So, despite the Zika virus needing mosquitoes to spread it around, it ended up spreading to 31 different countries, mostly in the Americas, causing only about 20 deaths until it died down around late 2016, but around 3,000 cases of microcephaly in Brazil alone, which actually makes it the largest health crisis to affect babies since thalidomide in the 1960s, which affected about 10,000 babies. So, all in all, this Zika virus pandemic, which didn't really kill anyone, turned out to be much worse than just a cold. So, the take home message from this video is that even if a new disease emerges that doesn't seem to kill anyone initially, this doesn't mean that we should just ignore it and not worry about it because it can be hiding some devastating long term effects. To add to this, we've even seen cases where diseases that have long known to be harmless to humans have suddenly just gained a mutation which causes it to be harmful. Just like the recent news of a common cold virus that caused a few children to have liver failure. So I will go on to suggest that you should do your best to avoid any disease, which is something that the germaphobes among you would like to hear, because, like for the case of Zika virus, you'll never know if a cold ends up being more than a cold.